I remember all these.
Screen share. Actually, so do you want me to leave this up for now?
Yeah, you leave it up until you're done with it, and then we'll just show up.
Well, I'll leave it up until you want me to change it. Because if you were going to refer to that.
Are you going to do a little verbal announcement or not?
Oh, just briefly, yeah.
Yeah, do that and then take it.
Okay, I think we're going to get started. So thank you all for coming this afternoon. This is our 7th year for the Sustainable Crash Course. So we're very excited to have yet again another successful year. And thanks again for coming out from wherever you came from. We appreciate it. And I'll leave it to Carl now.
Thanks, Megan. I have a question for anyone. Is this your first crash course here at Pratt? We've got a handful of people here. One of the great things about the crash course is this is one of the big public events of something that happens at Pratt a lot, which is the Center for Sustainable Design Strategies. This is our logo here, which does a lot of initiatives in the classroom with instructors like myself, Frank Malero, Erica Doy, who are in this room, as well as with businesses and community members. And you can find out a lot more about what we do at csds.pratt.edu. And one of the other public things we have is the Brooklyn Fashion Design Accelerator at 630 Flushing in Brooklyn. There are events all through the year there, and you can see from the webpage there the URL for what's going on there. I'm really delighted to be part of the crash course because this is part of our public discussion of what we try to do as educators here at Pratt. My name is Carl Zimring. I've been here for 5 years. I'm the coordinator of the Sustainability Studies minor. I'm an environmental historian, and I love teaching at Pratt because I'm a historian of waste, and I can talk about what we've done as industrial society that has had consequences to the environment and to people related to waste, to the wonderful students here who are creating buildings, clothing, furniture, other goods, that the way they are designed, used, consumed, and ultimately disposed of relates strongly to my work. So if I can have that conversation with students, it's a really enriching thing for me to do. And relates to the book that I have here for sale. Aluminum Upcycled, Sustainable Design in a Historical Perspective, is a direct outgrowth of the work I've been doing at Pratt here. Working with CSDS and working with the students, a lot of those conversations made me think about contemporary sustainability design strategies. How are we doing on this?
We're good.
Awesome, because I'm about to start playing with this.
Perfect.
And again, the book really relates to a lot of the curriculum we have here. And so what I wanted to do with our time is spend about half of it talking about the inspiration for the book, some brief examples of what's in the book, maybe have some questions, and then if you're interested in purchasing a copy, I have a bunch for $30 for sale here at the end. If you go downstairs from the room we're in now, there is a room called CSDS, the Center for Sustainable Design Strategies, which has a material library. And the person who's put this entire program together today, Carolyn Schaefer, discussing ways in which designers of anything, goods or services, can use strategies to best represent sustainable values in their work. And we are one of the independent colleges of art and design throughout North America that tries to achieve this. One of the things we have is a coalition called the Partnership for Academic Leadership in Sustainability. That meets about once a year, has a lot of online conversations about, again, best practices for sustainability education. A couple of the authors of that created the Ocala Practitioner, which very much looks at process trees and ways of doing life cycle assessments of work to determine how best to proceed. CSDS is also Pratt's gateway to institutional sustainability efforts with, again, the BFDA, as I just mentioned. I teach social science seminars, mostly history, but also anthropology, sociology, and economics, to try to provide historical context to the work that students are doing and exploring the social, cultural, economic, and environmental consequences, which is the rationale for Aluminum Upcycled. The new book's also an outgrowth of my first book, Cash for Your Trash, which came out, 12 years ago. It's a history of scrap recycling in the United States from colonial times to the end of the 20th century. And I use that time period because far from thinking that simply recycling got created around Earth Day, 1970, for environmental reasons, there have been economic incentives to reuse materials throughout industrial history. Largely that if you've got a metal like steel, it's much cheaper to get scrap material from, say, demolished buildings than it is to dig into the earth, get some more ore out, and then create new steel. Today, though, we think of recycling as an environmental ethic, a moral activity that can help us assuage the guilt of our vastly consumptive society. Here in this room, right by the door, we have a little bin in which, when you are done with your disposable coffee containers, of which I see several in this room, or disposable single-use plastic water bottles, you can put them in the bin. Someone takes them away to probably go to a landfill, although maybe it could also be recycled. The notion of recycling as an environmental ethic has in many ways been shaped by the industries that create this packaging. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Miller, Budweiser, all started in the 1950s, a group called Keep America Beautiful, which argues that the responsibility for dealing with waste is not the producer who has designed and mass-produced this material, but municipalities and individuals. So if you do not put your material in the right place, you are a litter bug. If you do not recycle, you are wasteful. And this leads to images like the ones I have on the screen. It's the greatest of all mistakes to do nothing because you can only do little. And we start teaching people about recycling literally from nursery school on. Keep America Beautiful has been very successful at this. There are over 10,000 community recycling pickup programs across the United States working now. And in recent years, Keep America Beautiful has been touting the advantages of taking value from waste and creating new things. If you are taking the bus in Brooklyn, sometimes you're at a stop where you might see signs like this. A little can saying, "I'd like to be a bike, please recycle me." And look, you can take this single-use disposable container and create this wonderful bicycle. Plastic bottle saying, "I'd like to be a bench, recycle me." This type of recycling is a little more sophisticated than our understanding of a can become another can. This is really a visual display of upcycling. Upcycling now has a dictionary definition. This is a fairly recent thing. And what upcycling is to reuse material that's been disposed of and create something of elevated value. And that elevated value can be, it's useful in a durable way. So instead of having a plastic water bottle, that'll be useful for about 20 minutes. You can turn it into a bench that for many years people will be able to sit on. Additionally, upcycling might increase the value. That bench may be worth much more than the 100 or so plastic bottles people drank out of to produce it. So the economic value may be greater as well. This is a practice that over the last 20 years or so has gotten increasingly popular with designers and craftspeople. Fashion uses this quite a lot, and contemporary upcycling efforts range greatly in scale and kind. If you look for the word upcycling on Etsy, you'll see a lot of things that people have done individually, taking material out of the bins that we dispose of and maybe making clothing or art or crafts out of them on an individual artisanal basis. In the last few years, however, upcycling has been attached to practices that take place on a much greater scale. The allure of upcycling to attack environmental problems associated with waste has made its way to large corporations. One of the more visible ones of late is the shoe company Adidas has partnered with designer Cyril firm Parley to produce a sneaker, which we're seeing here, which is made out of the fibers from fishing nets found in the oceans. So that if you buy these $150 sneakers, you can think, I'm helping to take plastic out of the oceans. Recently, Adidas announced production of swimwear created from the same materials. Most of the books on upcycling have been published since 2007. They're largely design and crafts texts with how-to instructions on reuse in specific applications. So jewelry upcycled, how to upcycle, create beautiful things with the stuff you already have. Those are most of the books. The text in the very corner, though, has a much more ambitious agenda. William McDonough, who's an architect, and Michael Braungart, a chemist, have partnered for about 20 years to create the Cradle to Cradle certification program, and they wrote a book about 15 years ago called Cradle to Cradle: How to Reduce Notions of Waste in Industrial Society. 4 years ago, they wrote a book called The Upcycle: Beyond Sustainability, Designing for Abundance, which was a manifesto for the future of industrial design. McDonough and Braungart described how industrial production should be reconceived to increase the value of existing materials with the ultimate goal of never casting any material from manufacture into sinks and never to create toxic wastes. This is the most ambitious recasting of upcycling yet, and it's a very exciting, optimistic proposal. Yes. Policies to encourage or mandate recycling have actually allowed for a lot of cradle-to-cradle products to be certified, especially in the European Union, where there's producer responsibility, in that if you've got a plastic water bottle, the company manufacturing the plastic water bottle has a responsibility, a fiscal responsibility to manage the waste from it. Thinking about how current interest in recycling has a history beyond just the last 10 years of books that have been published, led me to think about how we might examine this history. And in doing so, I decided to use the case of aluminum. Aluminum is a fascinating material, and I fully admit that one of the reasons I chose this is I really love the properties of the material and how it's been used. And I also am fascinated by its history, because even though Charles Martin Hall and his sister Julia were able to synthesize aluminum from bauxite in 1886 in a somewhat easier manner than was possible before, mass production of aluminum has a fairly recent history, the 1930s on, in large part because of the massive amount of energy required to produce it. It became a significant part of the waste stream during and after World War II. And Cambridge University engineering professors Julian Allwood and Jonathan Cullen published an analysis of sustainable materials in 2012, observing that 2 of them were particularly suited for production in a sustainable way. Those 2 materials are steel and aluminum. Why? Both materials are readily abundant in the Earth's crust, and both had the requisite material properties for wide applications in construction and industrial production. Allwood and Cullen conclude that, quote, there aren't any other materials that have such a good range of properties, are available cheaply, and in abundance. And recycling aluminum has both environmental and economic benefits when compared to the destructive consequences of producing virgin aluminum from bauxite. Bauxite, though it's abundant, has to be mined out of the Earth's crust. This can damage local water sources, it can have hazards to the workers mining it. And beyond that, again, the amount of energy required to turn bauxite into from a brittle reddish rock to a nice smooth metal is very intensive. Recycling aluminum, on the other hand, because it's already coming from aluminum that had been created from bauxite, has what a number of proponents say would be a 95% energy savings from creating virgin aluminum. There's some debate over exactly how much the number is, but the consensus is at least there is a 67 to 70% reduction in energy required to create secondary aluminum rather than primary aluminum. And it's a big part of the reason why aluminum is so widely recycled. Looking at the production of aluminum in the United States, one thing that strikes me about this graph is the red is from recycled, the blue is from primary, and increasingly after 1970, the share of recycled metal in overall aluminum production in the United States has gone up to the point that is now the majority of aluminum produced in the United States. Which means it is more likely than not that if you have a good made of aluminum in the United States, that good is probably made of recycled material. The present day prominence of aluminum in goods is celebrated as upcycled, provides us a language to evaluate the historical record. Now, how we've recycled aluminum and how users treated and valued the products produced from it gives us some historical context for understanding how the newly upcycled goods Adidas and other companies are making now may affect the environment and the economy in the future. Okay, skip over that.
Is this the material amount of production or the energy consumption?
This is the amount of production. So this is actually volume of aluminum produced. And again, the key thing to take away with this is that the majority for the last several years has been secondary. The economics of recycling aluminum have made reclamation a great success story because one of the reasons for this is it's just simply cheaper for Coke, Pepsi, anyone to use recycled aluminum. Industrial ecologists have talked about the great success story of recycling aluminum. KJ Marchek estimated in 2003 that 73% of all aluminum produced globally since the year 1950 was still in service. And Wei Kang Jen estimated in 2013 that more than 2/3 of all the aluminum that had entered the United States since the year 1900 was still in use. Moreover, as we can see here, by 1950, scrap comprised about 1/3 of all aluminum used in production in the United States. Currently, it's more than 65% of all the aluminum. If any mass-produced material can claim to have a circular material flow over time, aluminum is that material. It's the most successfully recycled material in the United States in the early 21st century. It's been this way for a while. Since 1950, various industries have used recycled aluminum to mass produce many goods of increased value. And so about half of the book is case studies of these. I'm going to very briefly walk you through some of them, just to give you an idea of what we're looking at. Big reason for massive production of aluminum during World War II was transportation. If you have a bomber made out of aluminum rather than steel, it can go further on the amount of jet fuel that you've got, and you can be more effective in military, both reconnaissance and bombing. And so we produced a lot of aluminum to make airplanes during the war. After the war, we had the capacity with hydroelectric dams to produce much more aluminum. And one of the early industries to really seize upon this was the automobile industry. Not so much for mass production, but for small runs of sports cars. Aston Martins, Lamborghinis, Porsches, all love putting aluminum in their bodies because that reduced the amount of weight of the body. The car could go faster. And so the picture on the top is an Aston Martin from 1956 that was produced in very small numbers. Over the course of the 1970s and 80s, more sports cars used these, and in 1990, Honda created the NSX, sold as the Acura NSX in the United States, and over the next 16 years, produced several thousand of these cars. Again, aluminum is being used there, not because it's environmentally sustainable, but because it can make this really cool car go much faster. That said, a couple of years ago, Ford Motor Company, for environmental reasons, changed the materials of the body of their biggest selling truck, the F-150, from steel to aluminum, because the rationale was this will increase the fuel efficiency of the truck. They're not trying to race the truck around a track at 170 miles an hour, though that would be very entertaining to see. They're trying to increase their fuel efficiency standards. And so over the last 3 years, they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars in aluminum recycling facilities so that they can, at volume, produce these trucks. And they've been a tremendous success. In their first year of production, Ford sold more aluminum F-150s than Honda had sold of their entire run of the NSX over 16 years. So successful that Honda has more recently said, we're going to resurrect the NSX again. Tesla, for some of their new performance cars, are going with the all aluminum bodies as well. Aluminum in automobiles is a mainstream ethic right now. It's increasing in production. Could also say similar things about aluminum in airplanes and bicycles. I have that in the book, but I'd like to sidebar the transportation aspects of this now to talk about something that's actually near and dear to my heart here at Pratt, which is industrial design as it relates to furniture. This is a picture of the husband and wife team of Charles and Ray Eames, who worked for decades on using modern materials like molded plywood and acrylics and plastics and aluminum into furniture in the middle of the 20th century. Some of the most famous of their designs have been commissioned for the furniture company Herman Miller out of Western Michigan. Herman Miller's been producing furniture for over a century, but they're really closely associated with the mid-century modern designers, such as the Eameses. And very quickly, the commission for the aluminum group set of indoor-outdoor furniture, which this catalog shows some examples of, chairs, lounges, ottomans, and tables, became bestsellers for Herman Miller. By 1960, this was a big part of the company's sales. And ever since then, the company, Herman Miller, has been producing Eames furniture. This despite the fact that Charles died in 1978 and Ray died in 1988. Their designs from half a century ago continue to be made new. And they're extremely valued. Charles Eames's idea with this furniture was to create what he called covetables. A covetable is something that you buy it, you have sacrificed for it. If you've ever seen the cliches from jewelry companies that if you're going to buy an engagement ring for your fiance, it's got to be like 2 months' salary. The notion of that is 3 months' salary, says the fairly recently married man in the back, Eric Godoy. But the idea behind that is you have just made a serious commitment. You value the person you're giving that to, and you're valuing the actual thing that has been produced. That was Charles Eames's idea. His furniture regularly sold for $3,000 a piece in the 1960s. So this was not stuff that was meant for the masses. These were for people who could afford it and who would treat it as a valued good for years and years and years. Maybe it would be in their will when their estate passed out of their hands when they died to the next generation. Eames furniture became very popular in upper middle class homes, in offices, and they retained their value. The Eames designs from the 50s and 60s built a foundation for environmentally sensitive design at Herman Miller. And the pieces continue to be produced, but they've changed the way they've been produced over time. Charles Eames would often talk about maybe we use adhesives, maybe we use some polyurethane, we use some PVC vinyl. In the more recent past, Herman Miller has looked at how to restore the older productions that they have. And one of the things they have is the as new policy. They've been doing this for about 33 years. So if you bought a Herman Miller chair in 1961, the seat cover is worn, you can take it back. They will refurbish the piece, extending the useful life of it. Related to that, over the last 25 years, Herman Miller has been working very closely with William McDonough of Cradle to Cradle and the Upcycled fame. They've developed extended producer responsibility programs, a Design for the Environment program that led them to assess what kind of material changes or production changes should we make with our existing designs so that they can be A, easier to recycle if they need to be, and B, reduce the amount of waste and toxic materials produced by the process of manufacturing them. More recently, Herman Miller partnered with William McDonough in 1995 to create a brand new production facility called the Greenhouse in Holland, Michigan. It's almost 300 square feet. It's got a lot of natural light, it's got a lot of plants in it, and it's meant to be as environmentally sensitive and industrial design facility as is possible. One constant of the Eames designs that Herman Miller has sold from the 1950s until 2017 is aluminum is a large structuring material in these chairs. Another one is they're really valuable and expensive. You could try to find a used Eames chair made 40 years ago online to save money compared to the price of a new one. You're not really going to save that money unless it's in dreadful shape. Those old versions are very expensive. New ones, you can just take a credit card and go to the Design Within Reach website, and as long as you have $3,200 limit left on your credit card, you can get a new one made. And in fact, lots of people do this. We now have more aluminum furniture than ever before. Some of this is functional. One of the great things about the Eames furniture is they're durable, they're comfortable, but they're also fairly light. So you can move them around an office a lot. So functionality of aluminum is really important to them. And functionality of aluminum is also important to this last set of case studies I want to talk about before I conclude with some thoughts. And those are musical instruments, specifically guitars. Actually, I'm going a little too quickly on this. I should say that other designers have used aluminum for chairs. In the more recent past, Norman Foster, the famous architect, and Philippe Starck have done this expressly because aluminum they see as a sustainable material. Philippe Starck was quoted saying, "Heritage begets recycling," and his goal with Emeco, who he produces chairs for, is to take things out of the landfills and make high quality things. Starck mentions, working with aluminum has allowed me to use a recycled material and transform it into something that never needs to be discarded. A timeless and unbreakable chair to enjoy for a lifetime. It's a chair you never own, you just use it for a while, and then it's the next person's turn. And again, many more of these chairs than ever before, and because people value them and find them comfortable and aesthetically pleasing. In terms of functionality, one of the reasons why aluminum is used in musical instruments is, I can see there are a couple of guitarists in the audience here. Aluminum is much more durable than wood and also has a resonance to it, so that a number of guitar manufacturers have decided to use aluminum in place of wood over the years. This has been going on since the 1930s. Rickenbacker started what we essentially know as lap steel guitars with aluminum design. But the development of covetable electric guitars with aluminum necks intensified around 1970. Two designs I want to briefly mention are John Valino's model, of which is being played here by the guitarist Todd Rundgren, and Travis Bean. Using alloys suitable for aircraft fuselages, these men developed durable instruments that use their materiality for unique properties. The strength of the aluminum allowed them to make extraordinarily thin necks that, had they made them out of wood, would have simply snapped under the tension of the strings, and there's no worry about the aluminum warping or breaking. Writing in January of 1976, Cream music critic Eric Gare called the designs a new technology in the field of solid body electric guitars and basses. One of the great things about them is that they have a one-piece aluminum neck assembly of the guitar that forms a solid metal link between both ends of the string. This relative rigidity allows the string to continue to vibrate as long as the physics of the string itself allow, thus adding to the sustaining and harmonic properties of the instrument. During the 1970s, aluminum neck guitars found favor with many famous players, including Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones, Jerry Garcia of the Grateful Dead, and Todd Rundgren. Because the guitars were made in fairly small batches by small shops using high quality material, they were very expensive, about $1,000 in 1976 dollars, which would be about $4,000 today. Made to order, the designers were not fully compensated until the instrument was complete, and problems with cash flow led to both Volino and Bean ceasing operations by 1979. One of Bean's partners, Gary Kramer, took over making somewhat lower quality aluminum instruments for the next 3 or 4 years. But by 1982, aluminum-made guitars were virtually no longer in production for a while. What happened over the next quarter century is the guitars made in the early 1970s increased in value on the secondary market, regularly selling for several $1,000s a piece. Musicians working in the 1990s, such as shellac Steve Albini, liked the instruments because they were so durable, they were virtually impossible to break no matter how badly you treated the instruments or what kind of unusual tuning and tensions you put on strings. Albini still managed to break one of his guitars anyway because he was really, really bad with it. It was a combination of metal and wood body. Atypically, one Bean guitar owned by Jerry Garcia sold at auction for $312,000. Obviously, the owner of the guitar had been one reason for the value. That said, guitars that are 40, 45 years old regularly sell for over $6,000 or $7,000 today. Because of the interest in these guitars, new designs went into production over the last 12, 13 years. The Obstructures Collective developed aluminum guitars, drums, and cabinets meant to be so durable that you can run over them with a car and they'll be fine. The most prolific of the 21st century designers is Kevin Burkett, who works under the name the Electrical Guitar Company, or EGC. He's been producing guitars since 2004. Influenced by both Volino and Bean, he's produced over 1,200 instruments, which sell new for between $2,000 and $3,200 a piece. Starting 4 years ago, Burkett teamed with Travis Bean's widow, Rita, to develop Travis Bean designs, recreations of some of Travis Bean's later designs, and those guitars sell new for between $6,000 and $8,000 a piece. There is a waiting list for them. This is how coveted these instruments are. Players include Buzz Osborne of the Melvins, Tom Peterson of Cheap Trick, and the touring musicians behind Linda Perry. I have a lot more on the history and present use of aluminum guitars in the book, but I include these examples because, like Charles Eames's chairs, they take secondary aluminum and turn them into extremely expensive, durable goods, last for decades, and will sell for thousands of dollars even when they are used. Like the Ford F-150, the recent production of these guitars is on a much greater scale than of past eras of production. We have more aluminum guitars than ever. Now, all of this production seems to confirm Keep America Beautiful's aspiration that we can turn our junk into great things. Upcycling appears to be a logical design solution to the unsustainable disposal we have in industrial society. The power of intentionality, Braungart and McDonough argue, will eliminate waste and, quote, create a more abundant, joyful world for future generations. The historical record of aluminum confirms but also complicates this picture. For more than half a century, designers have used secondary aluminum to create wonderful goods that retain and even increase their value with time. The history of the goods that I talk about in this book indicates that there's a real basis for the claim that designers can work to close loops of material flows and make good things. So in some sense, these goods are triumphant examples of upcycling, but there's a complication. So this is US aluminum production over about a 62-year period. I'd like to show you global primary aluminum production from the last 45 years. We're making more aluminum than ever. We have more than triple the amount of bauxite mined and produced as primary aluminum today than we had 37 years ago. This means more mines in places like Jamaica that are endangering the water and endangering the workers, more smelters working worldwide, particularly in China over the last 3-4 years, but globally, an increase in the material being used. And Granted, some of them is because we are just taking more and more soda bottles and beer cans and, do I have it in here? Let's see. These things. This is a ketchup packet. We've got thousands of these that we have that are actually hybrids of aluminum and plastic. So we can crinkle them like this. This is impossible to recycle because it's a mutant material. And this is one of the reasons for that increase. But another one is this. We are creating more valued goods from aluminum. Like the computer that I'm working on, for example, right here. The body of this is aluminum. It helps reduce the amount of heat in the computer, which means we can design this in ways that don't lead to carcinogenic chemicals being in here, but the demand for the aluminum is greater, as is the case of the guitars, the vehicles, and the furniture I've talked about. And this is tricky. Creating covetables increases production. Upcycling absent a cap on primary aluminum extraction does not close the industrial loops so much as it fuels environmental exploitation. Secondary aluminum supplements the large technological systems that produce primary aluminum, and the relationship between mined ore, massive amounts of energy, and the environmental damage they produce remains central to the metal's use. An Emeco chair or a Travis Bean guitar won't go into a landfill. And indeed, they may use nothing but recycled metal to produce the good. Even though those covetables may be made of recycled material, they help increase the demand for metal overall. More and better use of aluminum means that more aluminum is required. And this is the story for what, again, may be the most sustainable material in industrial production. We could do a history of plastics, plural for plastics, because it's not just one material, that talk about what Adidas is doing with ocean waste, or what Patagonia is doing with PET bottles to make fleeces. And those are successful examples of using plastics. The plastic recycling rate, though, is much smaller in 2017 than was the recycling rate for aluminum 60 years ago. And it will not get much bigger because there's many different plastics. Mixing them together can cause impurities, make it difficult to recycle. And unfortunately, for many plastics, it's simply cheaper to make new from petroleum than to collect and recycle the other goods. We know we can make beautiful and valuable goods out of discarded material. To the extent that reducing materials in landfills, incinerators, and waterways is a goal of sustainable design, the historical examples of aluminum give us hope, but they also show us a lot of the really difficult issues in producing for industrial consumption. Now, one of the reasons why I like talking about this is this program is one of the efforts of the Center for Sustainable Design Strategies. When I have the center work with my classes, one of the things we talk about with industrial production is you have to think in terms of systems. Systems of mining, systems of creation, systems of disposal. And with that in mind, we try to tell our students that we have a great example for the most sustainable automobile design of the 21st century. It's not Tesla, it's not the Ford F-150, it's Zipcar. What is Zipcar? It's a car sharing program. Basically what Zipcar is if you have 100 people in Brooklyn, they're all members, they can effectively, through a reservation system, share 3 automobiles, which means you only have to make 3 automobiles rather than 100 to serve all of them. The amount of materials required for that, the amount of embodied energy in those 3 cars is vastly less than if we were going to simply sell each person their own vehicle. The sharing economy gives us some idea of how we can reduce our impact on the planet. But of course, this is tricky because we can all share Ford F-150 trucks conceivably. Would we all want to share our Eames furniture or our Travis Bean guitars? To a certain point, owning the covetable is the point. And this is one of the tricky things about industrial capitalism. We like to acquire things, but by acquiring, we are creating and continuing to create environmental damages that we have not not only not begun to cap, but have actually exacerbated over time. That's the reason I wrote the book. I'm going to be using this in my production, consumption, and waste class this fall. I have copies for sale for $30, but before we do that, I'd just like to open the floor to you nice people who joined me here today on this Saturday. So thank you for listening.
How do finishes affect its upcyclability?
Finishes of the aluminum.
Yes.
Fabulous. This is one thing I decided not to talk about in this little talk, but one of the things about recycling is relative to mining new steel, new aluminum. It's great. However, what do we do when we recycle? We melt down to separate the aluminum from whatever is with it. So if you have Imron paints or something, people melting that down will be breathing it in. Are there carcinogens involved? Yes. Might you be creating slag with this? Yes, you might. There are environmental consequences of just recycling. So deciding what things are in the alloy or what finishes are on, chrome especially would be a big one. Yeah, there's going to be an impact, and it may affect local groundwater depending on how you're doing it. And again, this is one of those strategies. Think through every stage of the process to think about what the consequences are going to be.
I think you touched on this quite a bit, but I would like to, get a little more clarification, which is, you spoke about luxury, not luxury, but the coverables, and then,
Luxury is a fair word for it too.
right? Once upon a time, sugar and pepper were luxuries, but now everyone uses it. And once upon a time, shampoo bottles are luxury, so they made them into sachets so that they're more affordable. And then this is what's happening in the world. And on the other hand, you have McDonough or Ronda talking about abundance. And there are people who say that we don't have to reduce consumption anymore. All we have to do, we can, do this infinitely, the circularity. And in theory, you're saying that aluminum is the most, can provide an ideal situation for circularity and to compare others. If this is the ideal, and if we still have problems, how do you grasp the the other side, the circular economy, or that kind of concepts, with what's happening right now?
I basically argue that the model of the circular economy really doesn't work. It's not so much a circle, it's an upward spiral. And so one of the things I conclude with the book is policy matters. Extended producer responsibility, law of the land in the European Union, not here. And a lot of where the greatest production consumption is happening is where there isn't extended producer responsibility. That's why I say absent a cap on producing primary materials, we can't talk about a circular economy because there's always inputs coming into the economy. And that's true for this. For plastics, it's 90% of that material is input coming from petroleum or other goods. So one of the reasons I wrote this book is it really uses history to question the assumptions of the circular economy. As just a market-based efficiency, we're going to be naturally, and I use the word natural very deliberately, environmentally responsible, just through producing, and everyone will get what they want, nothing to worry about. I say that is a fiction. We don't have a history that backs that up.
If I can add, this question, I've been dealing with this question for quite a while now, for a few weeks, and it came about because we see the sachets in the ocean now, because they're the low-value plastics. The high-value plastics are recycled in developing countries, but not the low-value plastics because people don't have time for the value that they create. And so how do we, when we look at waste history or environmental history, how do we create materials which are affordable but also sustainable?
This is one of the truly vexing questions. How do we make sure that the standards of living that we have, not just the materials, not just the standards of living, are affordable and sustainable? One thing I would look at is actually, I'm going to plug another historian's work. Susan Strasser, American historian, wrote a book called Waste and Want, Social History of Trash. We are now acclimated to thinking, I'm just going to use an American example now, that these single-use water bottles and coffee cups are the natural thing to be doing. It's like, yeah, we drink this, we throw it away, someone does something with it. 100 years ago, that would be an utterly bizarre concept. We would have big, reusable, rewashable, not recyclable, rewashable glass bottles that we would give back to the producer. Thinking about that and how durables that may serve various people, like this water bottle, for example, might be one way to start thinking about that. Why do we have so much short-term use disposable goods? Be it packaging for beverages, be it fast fashion to be wearing. Because if you can go and get a shirt from Old Navy for $10 and you're close to the poverty line, why wouldn't you buy that shirt? Of course, 6 weeks later, that shirt may fall apart and you buy a new one. What producers' decisions are in terms of how they're making things and then how they price them has a big effect on that. I'm arguing what government can do to help coordinate that is an important role. And we see that in places like the EU that we don't see in the United States, or in Malaysia, for example. And thinking about how the stewardship of objects, as Susan Strasser would call it, can be more important so that whether or not things are $3,000 or $3, they're meant to last for a long time and be reused and maybe given to other people is important. Our economy is early model. I'll give you this. No, I'll sell you this. And that's a problem. Because when the profit margin comes in, then creating more is crucial. And we haven't gotten around that. The environmental ethicist in the back.
One comment and a question. You missed a good opportunity to make a pun on sustainability when you were talking about the resonance of the aluminum guitars.
The chapter title for the book is called Guitar Sustained, so I was trying to be responsible when talking to you, but thank you, Eric.
So way back when, one of the first research projects I worked on was tracking aluminum in water. Aluminum, like a lot of metals, is very toxic. Just in the ecosystem. I'm wondering if there are any, if you talk at all about, you talked a bit about water in the talk, but in the book, do you talk about aluminum specifically as a contaminant or pollution, and is that exacerbated by recycling it, or is it made better by recycling it?
Short answer is yes, I talk about it in the book. Yes, primary aluminum production is incredibly destructive to water. Secondary aluminum production has consequences to water that are less intensive than primary. That's one of the reasons that we talk about why it's so important to recycle this. But my conclusion that even just using more recycled aluminum leads to more primary aluminum being mined, that's where the issue with ecosystem degradation comes through. Yeah, so the first half of the book is how we started producing aluminum in the first place. Second chapter is all the horrific environmental problems through creating and disposing of aluminum. Third chapter is about how the modern aluminum recycling industry really grew, and then the last half of the book are these case studies. So I talk a lot about horrific things that are happening in Hungary and Jamaica, and cancers and endocrine disruptors, all the things that we are terrified about with industrial production, and the notion that recycling can help reduce that. Well, yeah, when we're recycling it, we're not doing it, but if the recycling is triggering the creation of more mines, it's not helping with those problems. So yes, that's in the book. And thank you for allowing me to do the pun. Neil.
I'm interested in this moment that you alluded to briefly in the 70s about the Keep America Beautiful campaign and the idea of the burden of responsibility being shifted from the producer to the consumer. I don't know how much you know or how much you can talk about like that moment, and was there a lot of lobbying by producers to kind of support that campaign, to kind of shirk responsibility for what they were producing?
The moment is more than the 70s. I know way more than we're going to be able to get into now, but there's over a 20-year period where Keep America Beautiful is not only doing these things, the crying Indian and whatnot, but lobbying Congress, lobbying state governments. And again, really made it possible for the burden to be not on them, with a few exceptions. We have in New York a bottle deposit law, so that if you ever go to a supermarket that has the reverse vending machines, you might see someone with 500 cans or bottles and just putting one at a time back into those. They get a deposit back on that. New York has that law. I think 16 states have that law. Keep America Beautiful. One of the key things they were doing in the 70s and 80s is stopping more states from doing that, because that puts the onus for the disposal back on them and not on cities, not on individuals. So if we are in Nebraska, there's no deposit bill. And If you're Omaha, you've got to deal with all that waste. Budweiser doesn't have to worry about that. That's actually the most valuable thing Keep America Beautiful was doing for its constituencies, is keeping those laws off the books in as many places as possible. And that starts in the 1950s. Are we out of time?
Yeah,
Okay.
Unless somebody has a quick question, but we can also answer questions outside too.
Yes, and again, if you'd like to buy a copy of this outside, I'm happy to provide that for you. Megan, thank you for being timekeeper. Thank you all for your engaged questions and being here on a Saturday. And I'll shut up now so the next people can get in the room.
Sorry about the
No, that's-
presentation.
That's exactly what you should be doing. And again, you've taken a class with me. You know how long I can go on.